What's up guys, Maidenslave here, and today we're going to be talking about Nostradamus by Judas Priest, one of the most controversial heavy metal albums of all time. And I remember when this thing first came out. In fact, I remember when it was first announced, I got super excited. I thought that the idea of Priest coming together with an orchestra and this big concept was going to be absolutely fantastic. It was going to be a breath of fresh air. I was still kind of, heartbroken by the reunion with Rob Halford. I wasn't satisfied yet. And when I heard about this, I was just really happy, because to me, Judas Priest was a band that never took a chance. They always kind of did what they were good at. Basically, they played it safe, and they did what they knew that they could do. So when I heard that they were taking on this huge concept, I was really happy. It's something that I always wanted Iron Maiden to do, to pair it with an orchestra and make some big production thing. And obviously they went down a completely different path. That's a different story though. And I remember when I first heard the song Nostradamus, I was just wowed. I thought it was a really good idea to kind of bring Priest and this classical vibe together. Sounded like a metal opera. Not a cheesy, cliche one, but it actually sounded very good. And I enjoyed it quite a bit. And then the album came out, and I got it, and I enjoyed it as well. I actually do enjoy this album. And it wasn't only until a few years later that I found out that a lot of people didn't enjoy this album, and I couldn't understand why. And I think I have a kind of a good idea of why a lot of Judas Priest fans don't, in fact, enjoy this album. Because a lot of Judas Priest fans actually like what I don't like about Judas Priest. Kind of their more simple, straight to the point, radio friendly type songs from the 80s. And a lot of that to me is just boring. It was always playing it safe. A lot of Judas Priest fans even like what they did with Ram It Down and even Turbo, which I thought was just a complete waste of time, and is a complete waste of time to listen to. I always wanted them to take a risk. And I think that the moments in the career when they actually did take risks, Sad Wings, Painkiller, is when they produced the best music. And Nostradamus, to me, is no different. They took a huge risk, and they just really adapted to the challenge. That's one thing that I have to say about Priest, is they're really good at adapting to challenges and changing their style. And to me, they did it at really an appropriate time, because around this time that the album came out, metal was almost completely revived, and people were listening to it again. And at this point in Priest's career, they could take a chance, and they did. As I mentioned, when they did Turbo, they actually wanted to do a double album called Twin Turbo, and or Twin Turbos, but their record company wouldn't allow them to. Now they were actually allowed to, and they did it. And well, actually, critically, it flopped, and among fans, it's not that popular. And they never really played it live. It was always tricky. They always kind of said, well, we want to play the entire thing live. But in all reality, most Priest fans just want them to play classics. So it's been kind of, tricky as far as it going live. So it hasn't, at this point, aged that well. Now, I'm not going to talk about each individual track on this album, because this album is very similar to something like The Wall by Pink Floyd, in that, aside from a few songs like Nostradamus, most of it is kind of just connected. It's one unit, and that's how you need to take it. But I think the thing that I am going to do is point out its weaknesses, and for me, point out its strengths. Now, right off the bat, it automatically has two major weaknesses, or two major risks that the band took. Number one, it's a concept album. A lot of bands tend to stay away from this, because in a lot of ways, and a lot of times, it goes very bad. A record company always kind of tells the band to maybe stay away from it, because when you're dealing with one concept, you kind of are counting on one thing, and if people don't like this concept, then they're not going to like the entire album. And the second bad thing / risk that they took was the fact that it is a double album. It's very long. It's easily over an hour. 2 CDs, just a lot to chew, basically. This is not going to be your run-of-the-mill Judas Priest album where you just pop it in and about 40 minutes later it's over and you enjoyed it. No, it is a lot to take in. Not only is it long, but it is a very deep listen. You need to listen to it maybe even a few times to really appreciate it. So right off the bat, I can agree with you guys that those were two major risks that they took. When I first got this album, I listened to the whole thing, but nowadays it was kind of hard to sit through the entire thing, which to me, is a sign of it has not aged well. I think that they should have picked either or. Either make a really long album or make a concept album that, each individual track, if I can even say individual, track needs each other, Like, if you were going to make a concept album where each individual track really needed each other, maybe make it 40, 50 minutes, or make a really, really long double album with very, very strong tracks on it, maybe even release it separately, do something like that. So, that's how I feel about that. Now I want to talk about some of the things that I actually did like about this album. Number one, right off the bat, is the production. This is some of the best production that I have heard, just period. I mean, with Judas Priest, production wasn't always their thing. A few times in their career, they really knocked it out of the park, Painkiller being one of those times. But for the most part, they kind of take it easy on production. I mean, obviously, they're a major act, their production's going to be good, but in the realm of phenomenal, they've only gone there a few times, and this is definitely one of those times. This is probably the best sounding album in the last decade of which it came out. So the production is amazing. The mixing, of how many instruments were involved. I don't think it was a full orchestra, but there was definitely at least a small orchestra playing with them the entire time, plus a lot of effects as well, a lot of electronic effects. The guitar sound is absolutely crisp and beautiful. The bass does what it needs to do, as it always does in Priest with Ian Hill. And the drums are rock solid, although they are not nearly as impressive as what Scott used to do, but I can see what they were doing. They kind of all backed away a little bit in order to make a big product. The soloing is some of the best soloing that I've heard from Priest in a very long time, but that is not saying much. I mean, it is solid, but it's not classic Priest, but it does get the job done. There are a lot of good twin leads in there, and there is a lot of good melodic passages. For the most part, when you really get into this album, there is a lot of moments that actually do remind me of major highlights in the career, like Painkiller. They tend to kind of lean toward the better side of their career on this album. And actually, when you really get into it and you get past the concept and you get past the orchestra and everything and all this stuff, it is just Priest. That classic kind of just straightforward rock and roll, swinging Priest from the 80s. When it really gets into the core of these albums, it leans towards more of that. Once you actually finally get into it, there's a lot of good, gallops. For the most part, I don't think that there's any thrash or speed metal elements like they did on Painkiller. But it seems to work. They actually, in my opinion, managed to marry the classical vibe and the concept with Priest. It still is Priest. It's Judas Priest doing the concept album. Let's talk about the actual concept, Nostradamus. I think that this was a pretty cool concept to take on with 2012 approaching at this point that they made the album. Nostradamus was a very important figure, although I'm not going to go into detail about this man because, I'm talking about Judas Priest. I'm just talking about whether or not it was a good concept for them to take on. I think it was an appropriate concept for them to take on at this point in their career. They found a lot of parallels with their career and with his life, being criticized for doing certain things, and all that good stuff. So it worked for me. I did not mind the concept at all, although some people could care less for the concept. They want Judas Priest to sing about rock and roll, cars, girls, and all that good shit, but I enjoyed the concept. So overall, I actually thought that Nostradamus was a solid performance by this band, and definitely one of the best albums that they have put out, probably since Painkiller. They have, in my opinion, gone through a very, very bad time for the previous 18, 17 years. They kind of lost their way, and after Painkiller, they really did. But in a lot of ways, this album revived the band, but also it kind of isolated them. It kind of alienated them from a lot of fans. A lot of fans kind of just ignore it, and now they're looking forward to the next Judas Priest album, which they are apparently working on at this moment. And I know that there has been quite a bit of changes in this band over the following years after this album came out, of which I will get to when their next album comes out and I talk about it. But for now, we are left with Nostradamus, and for me, it really wouldn't be a bad album for them to go out on. I mean, after Angel Retribution, I kind of felt like maybe Priest had really nothing more to offer, nothing more to give to the world of metal. It would just be kind of satisfying their fans, and in my opinion, shitting on their legacy even more. But once they came out with this album, I was like, good, that's it, just end here. But the vast majority of Judas Priest fans do not agree with me. They think that Judas Priest needs to end on a stronger note, aka a much more classic note. They want them to do at least one more album that is a lot more similar to their stuff in the 80s and even 70s. And their wishes are coming true at this point. Judas Priest is working on another album, and they say it is going to be a much more classic sounding album. So there you go. Until then, though, we have Nostradamus, and I'm going to give Nostradamus by Judas Priest an 8 out of 10. Later, guys.